The sun in Copper Ridge wasn't a friend. It was a relentless hammer, beating down on the dusty streets, and baking the hope right out of weaker souls. And on this particular morning, it bore witness to a sound that had no place in the civilized world. The sharp crack of braided leather, slicing through the oppressive morning quiet. There, in the center of the town square, tied to a rough-hewn wooden post, was Cordelia Hayes. Blood had begun to seep through the thin fabric on her back, but her head was held high. In her eyes, a resilient fire refused to be extinguished. Mayor Edmund Carver, a man whose stature was built on borrowed authority, stood on the platform. His voice rang out, slick and self-satisfied. "Let this be a lesson," he announced to the gathered crowd, some of whom looked away in shame, others who stared with a sick curiosity. "This is the price of stubbornness. Miss Hayes here has refused an honorable proposal of marriage from Mr. Silas Murdoch. A woman must know her place." Not far off, Silas Murdoch leaned against a porch post, his brawny arms crossed over a barrel chest. He was a man who measured his worth in cattle and land, and to him, a wife was another asset to be acquired. He nodded, a cold smirk touching his lips. "Just say the word yes, girl." His voice was a low gravel. "And this all ends. I'll even buy you a brand new dress for the wedding." Cordelia answered him not with words. She offered him a gesture of pure contempt, spitting into the dust at his polished boots. A shocked murmur rippled through the crowd. Even Carver looked stunned for a moment. 5 more lashes. Carver bellowed, his face flushing with humiliation. But as the deputy raised the whip again, another sound cut through the tension. A rhythmic, steady sound. The clip-clop of a horse on the main road. All eyes turned to a figure emerging from the heat shimmer of the morning. He wasn't a young man, nor was he old. His face was a map of hard miles and long-forgotten battles. He dismounted smoothly, and the soft chime of his spurs was the only music in a town holding its breath. "This is a local matter, stranger," Carver said, attempting a tone of command. The stranger didn't answer right away. His eyes, the color of a stormy sky, missed nothing. Cordelia's bloodied back, the whip in the deputy's hand, the smug look on Murdoch's face. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, and it carried no hint of doubt. "Let her go." Carver gave a nervous chuckle. "Now listen here, stranger. This woman has defied a lawful agreement. Mr. Murdoch paid good money." "I'm not asking," the stranger interrupted, and his hand drifted to the pistol at his hip. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. Murdoch's hand moved toward his own gun. "There's more of us than you, friend." A humorless smile touched the stranger's lips. "I'm used to that. It happened before a heart could beat twice." A blur of motion. 2 shots exploded almost as one. One of Murdoch's men screamed, clutching a shattered shoulder. The other just stared at a hand that would never hold a gun again. "Anyone else care to dance?" the stranger asked, his voice still calm. Silence was the only reply. He walked to the post, his pistol still smoking in his hand. He looked into Cordelia's eyes. "Hold still." With a single, swift cut of a knife, he sliced the rope. She slumped forward, her strength finally spent, and he was there to catch her, as if he knew she would fall. He had won the moment. But in a town built on greed and fear, a moment of justice is often just the quiet start of a much larger war. At the doctor's office, the air smelled of antiseptic and clean linen, a world away from the dust and blood of the town square. The old doctor, Morrison, tended to Cordelia's back with practiced hands. "These will leave scars, miss," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "You'll carry the map of this day for the rest of your life." Thaddeus stood by the window, watching the street. "How soon can she ride?" he asked. Cordelia struggled to sit up. "This is my home." "Not anymore," Thaddeus said, his gaze fixed on the town. "That boy, Jimmy, just rode in. He said Federal Marshall Cain is on his way here. For you." Cordelia's face went pale, but for a different reason. "My father," she whispered. "The $500 debt. It wasn't to Murdoch. It was to Cain." The name hung in the air, heavier than any whip or gun. It changed everything. This was no longer about a town bully. This was about the law. And the law was riding hard. They saw him from the window, Marshall Cain, a man carved from granite and obsession, leading a posse of grim-faced riders. There was no time. Thaddeus helped Cordelia out the back, onto horses he'd already prepared. They galloped out of Copper Ridge just as Cain's men began to flood the main street. Later, on the trail, one of Cain's younger deputies rode up beside him. "Marshal," he said, wiping sweat from his brow. $500 is a lot of money, but I've never seen a pursuit this determined." Cain stared ahead, his eyes fixed on the distant tracks. "It was never about the money, son," he said, his voice low and bitter. "Her father and I, we were partners. We found something in those hills that would make a man a king. He took out the loan for equipment, and then he claimed the fever took him." Cain spat on the ground. "He died with a secret. A map. A journal. Something. And I'll be damned if I let his daughter keep what's mine." The canyon walls closed in around Thaddeus and Cordelia, a stone trap under the blistering sun. A rifle shot echoed from above, not meant to hit, but to spook. It worked. Rocks tumbled down the cliffside, a wave of stone and dust that completely blocked the path ahead. They were trapped. Panic began to set in, but then, Cordelia's eyes focused. It wasn't a memory of fear that surfaced, but of adventure, from a time long ago. A secret place her father had shown her. "There," she said, pointing to a dark fissure in the rock face, almost hidden by overgrown brush. "It's a cave. It cuts through the mountain." Thaddeus didn't hesitate. He saw the truth in her eyes. "Go," he ordered, pulling his Colt. "I'll buy you time." He fired back at the men appearing on the ridge above, his shots precise, keeping their heads down. Cordelia scrambled toward the fissure, pulling her horse behind her. She looked back once, at the man who stood between her and certain death. And he simply nodded, trusting her completely. In that moment, they were no longer a rescuer and a victim. They were partners. They emerged hours later, exhausted and covered in dust, into a peaceful valley. Before them stood a trading post, built of sturdy timber and adobe. As they approached, a tall Piute man with a calm, commanding presence stepped out. His eyes met Thaddeus's, and a look of deep understanding passed between them. "My brother has returned," Joseph Crowfeather said. Later, as Cordelia's wounds were tended to again, she finally asked. Thaddeus was quiet for a long moment. Some stories are not easily told. They are carried like stones in the soul. He told her of his life before, as a scout for the U.S. Army. He told her of a day when he was ordered to stand by while his captain prepared to slaughter a village of innocent people for the land they lived on. He spoke of his choice, to defy that order, to fight his own men to save a young boy, Joseph. He told her how he became a fugitive that day, a man without a country, a man living by his own code. And as she listened, the way Cordelia looked at him changed. She was no longer looking at a stranger, or a savior. She was looking at a man. The thunder of hooves announced Cain's arrival. He and his posse surrounded the trading post, rifles ready. Cain dismounted, his face a mask of fury. "Rockwell," he bellowed. "You're harboring a fugitive. Send her out." Joseph Crowfeather stepped out to meet him, flanked by a dozen of his warriors, their faces stern. "Your laws end where this land begins, Marshal," Joseph said, his voice even. "This is sovereign ground." Cain faltered. His warrants and his authority meant nothing here. His obsession had led him to a wall he could not break. Then, Thaddeus stepped out beside Joseph. "Your business with her is finished anyway, Cain," he said. "2 hours ago, I wired $500 from a land sale account to the federal office in the county seat. The debt is paid." Cain's face went from rage, to disbelief, to pure, cold hatred. He was beaten. He had no legal claim, no authority, no path forward. He mounted his horse, his eyes locking on Thaddeus. He didn't need to say a word. He turned his posse around and rode away in a cloud of dust and silent fury. The immediate danger was over. But a man like Cain does not forget. And a fortune in gold casts a very long shadow. The journey to his ranch was a quiet one. They traveled for days, away from the reach of marshals and the memory of dusty towns. His home wasn't a grand place, nestled in a valley carved by a river long ago. But it was built of honest timber and solid stone. It was a place a man could breathe. Spring melted into a warm summer. The deep wounds on Cordelia's back faded into a network of pale scars. The wounds on the inside took longer to heal. They fell into a rhythm. A life measured not by the ticking of a town clock, but by sunup and sundown. He showed her how to mend a fence, how to read the clouds for rain. She showed him how to plant a garden that would survive the dry heat, how to turn a quiet house into a home. Words were few, but they weren't needed. They spoke through shared work, through glances across a dinner table, through the simple comfort of knowing the other was near. The debt between them was long since paid, replaced by something quieter and far stronger. But back in Copper Ridge, humiliation had festered into a poison. And Silas Murdoch had been drinking it down for months. His power was broken, his name a joke. He had lost everything, except for a burning, singular hatred. He used the last of his respectable money to hire a man who dealt in endings. A man known only as the Collector, for his habit of never returning empty-handed. Murdoch slid a pouch of gold across a grimy saloon table. "I want Rockwell dead," Murdoch hissed. "And the woman. I want her to watch." The Collector pocketed the gold without a word. His eyes were empty of everything but business. The Collector did not arrive at the ranch like a storm. He arrived like a shadow at dusk. There was no warning, save for a horse's nervous whinny, and the sudden silence of the crickets. Thaddeus knew that silence. He had heard it on battlefields and in ambushed canyons. He handed Cordelia a rifle. "Stay inside. Bar the door," he said, his voice low. She took the rifle. But as he slipped out into the twilight, she didn't bar the door. She moved to the window. This was her home now. And she would fight for it. What followed was not a gunfight, but a hunt. A deadly game of cat and mouse played among the shadows of the corrals and the barn. The collector was skilled, a patient predator. But Thaddeus was not prey. He was a protector. And he was not alone. A whisper from the window warned him of a shape on the roof. A lantern suddenly thrown from the doorway drew the hunter's fire, revealing his position. He was the sword. She was the shield. The final confrontation happened in the barn. A place of hay and horses and the smell of earth. Two men. Two professionals. Facing each other in the gloom. The silence was broken by a single, final shot. And then, nothing. Cordelia stood in the doorway, rifle raised, her heart pounding in her chest. Thaddeus emerged from the darkness. Weary, but whole. The last echo of Copper Ridge faded into silence. The next morning, the sun rose on a world that felt new. They stood together on the porch, looking out at the land. Their land. The air was clean. The silence was peace. "This ranch," Thaddeus said, his voice quiet. "It's a good place to build." He turned to her. "But a house needs more than one room. And a home needs a family." He didn't have to say anything else. His heart was in his eyes. They were married under an endless blue sky, with the mountains as their witness and Joseph Crowfeather as their guest of honor. The scars on her back remained, a map of where she had been. But the life they built together, filled with laughter and children who grew up hearing their story, was a map of where they were going. Together.